Hey guys, welcome back. Recently, I've just been on kind of a trip of watching interviews from people telling their stories from the Great Depression era. If you haven't checked them out already, there are a ton of really cool interviews sitting down from Great Depression era survivors, and it's a lot of advice that I think is just more and more valuable as time goes on and less available. So make sure to check out some of those videos if you haven't already. But today I am gonna go over just kind of a compilation of roughly 11 Great Depression era habits and skills that I have been starting to implement myself. They bring me more joy, but also they save a lot of money. And I do think that as time goes on, these skills are gonna become more and more valuable. So one of the first things I noticed that a lot of Great Depression era families did was make their own bread. And not just make their own bread, but they made pretty much a loaf a day, at least depending on how big the family was. So the first tip is gonna be make a daily loaf of fresh bread. Not only is it a lot cheaper than store-bought bread, it's also a lot better tasting. And I found it helps give inspiration for other dishes. So usually we'll just kind of snack on the first half of the loaf, and then we're left with about half of a loaf that can either serve as sandwiches the next day, or oftentimes if it's going stale, we can chop it up. And out of that, we can make bread pudding, we can make breakfast casseroles, we can make obviously things like meatloaf and meatballs with breadcrumbs. So just having kind of half a loaf of bread laying around does inspire a lot of more frugal dishes. And to me, it's a lot easier than just having a bazillion recipes on the internet that I have to narrow down. If I have half a loaf of bread that I have to use, I get a lot of good dish inspiration that way. I use a bread maker, which really makes it a lot easier for me to do it every single day. If I have to make it by hand, it doesn't happen every day so much. So sourdough is probably the most economical option, which you can use sourdough in a bread maker as well. But lately I've been a little behind on my sourdough, so I've just been using yeast and doing a regular loaf of bread in this bread maker, and I love this bread maker, so I'll link it for you below, but you can do it however you want. Habit number 2 is to save everything. There was one woman I remember mentioning that her mom would even save like the little strings that came on packaging. I think in today's society we have gotten so used to just throwing things away when they're inconvenient or when they are a little bit broken, or I mean even when they're too dirty, people throw things away now. So watching these interviews has really helped me shift my mindset to more the mindset of saving things instead of just throwing away cardboard boxes. We've been using them to make areas for new gardens, which I'll go into in a bit. Things like yogurt containers I've been saving and planting little plants in, which saves a lot of money instead of buying pots and buying those seed starting containers on the internet or at a garden store. Really, if you save things, you'll be amazed how much money you can save compared to the prices that stores are going to charge you for basically the exact same thing. If you guys have any ideas for things that you save and you are able to repurpose into new useful and money saving things, please leave a comment below because I am all for all those ideas right now. That brings me to number 3, which is to grow a garden. Growing your own food was absolutely imperative during the Great Depression. I know one woman mentioned that a lot of the farmers weren't hit quite as hard as people in the cities because they were just able to grow their own food. And she mentioned living in a tiny house with dozens of kids from the city who came to live with them because that was pretty much the only place that they could get food. So that's an amazing sense of community in the first place, but it does go to show that even the people who lived in suburbs and cities tended to grow gardens and grow food. They would also forage for food, things like dandelion greens in the spring. But what it all comes down to is just not necessarily going to the store and buying all your ingredients, but being self-sufficient. So we live in Wisconsin. Obviously, it's not very warm a lot of the year here, but there are still so many things that we can grow for food, and we do, and we absolutely love it. Plus, I mean, again, it all tastes better if you grew it yourself. If there was a secret ingredient that you could add to a dish to instantly make it taste like 50% better, of course we would all do that, right? And to me, that ingredient is just growing at least a few of the ingredients yourself. It really makes a big difference. This is a little tangent, but I think one of the sadder things about today is that people have been so duped into thinking that they have to buy so much stuff to do anything, thinking they have to buy everything to start a garden, because people have lost those skills of knowing how to cultivate soil and knowing how to fertilize naturally. So if you have started a garden and it has been way too expensive, you are not alone, but that is not the only way to do it. All you have to do is learn how to do it, how people during the Great Depression were doing it, and for many years before that, amazingly, people actually grew food before there were garden centers, which is crazy, right? It is very possible. I have way cut my gardening budget over the years just by learning these skills, so don't lose hope if that's you. Number 4 on that note is to keep backyard chickens. Backyard chickens are one of the most incredible money savers. They can be a money sink too. If you've watched my channel before, you know I talk all about how they can be a money sink and how to avoid that. So I have some other videos on that. But know that backyard chickens are one of the best ways to have your own protein. You can have fresh meat and fresh eggs. Although if you live in an area like us during the winter, they're gonna require feed. Depending on your breed and how many eggs you want, during the summer, you might have to feed them some chicken feed then too. But again, it's all about learning those skills of how did people used to take care of chickens before there were necessarily feed stores. It's a lot of learning, but it can be done. I'm a firm believer that chickens are the #1 animal for being more self-sufficient. They really can have a very low startup cost, and they can provide you so much in the form of not only meat and eggs, but fertilizer for your garden as well. And weed control too, fun fact. Number 5 is to buy food and cook in bulk. So the more of any given ingredient that you buy at one time, the more cost effective it is gonna be. So from listening to these videos about Great Depression era survivors, one of the main things that I learned is a lot of people ate the same thing over and over. And you know, part of it was because that was the most cost effective dish to have, but also it's because that was what was most available, and probably buying in bulk was more cost effective than trying to buy little bits and tons of different ingredients at once. So a lot of the dishes people made had only 2, 3, 4 ingredients in them, and they would mix it up as best they could. But it really goes to show that the more ingredients you buy, the more expensive a dish is. So if you can buy in bulk and you can stretch those ingredients a long way, it is just gonna be a lot more cost effective. Number 6 is to get organized. I don't know about you, but for me, I have found that the more stuff that I have, the more disorganized I tend to be. So it's okay to have less stuff. It's okay to, I guess, narrow down what you don't need, but also this idea really just comes from taking really good care of the things that you have. And I guess I'm speaking mostly for myself here. Taking really good care of the things that I have is something I'm learning to do. Keeping everything really organized, going through those shelves, making sure that everything is not only where it needs to be, but also that I'm familiar with everything in the house. I know where everything is. I know exactly what we have. That's the goal anyway. Because it's amazing how many things, at least I know that I buy, that I end up finding later that I already had. And it's an extra bummer when I find out that something I bought I could have used but is now expired. So a huge part of it is just getting organized and knowing exactly what is in the house at this time. Fortunately, that costs $0. Going off of what I talked about before, number 7 is just to fix it. Instead of throwing it away, fix it. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity to upgrade, fix it. You know, people are so used to just throwing something away or giving something away when it's inconvenient. Think about it this way. If you decide to fix or repair something, or reuse something, or upcycle something, if you decide to do that instead of throwing it away, not only, assuming you're successful, which doesn't always happen, but not only do you get the solution to the problem you had, but you also gain valuable experience which you can use in the future. So right now we have a stinking riding lawnmower that we bought used off of Facebook Marketplace. Wasn't the best decision. That thing has broken like 4 times. I do think a lot that, you know, maybe we just should have bought a new riding lawnmower and our lives would be easier. But the thing is that every repair we make, we now can diagnose the problem better in the future, and we have the experience to fix it. So people will go and buy a course online and try and learn stuff through a screen, but really nothing is quite the same or quite as valuable as hands-on experience. So if you have something that's broken and you can give fixing it a try instead of replacing it, no matter how big or small, it's probably worth your while. Plus, if you're anything like me, it'll probably increase your attention span too. Number 8 is going to be preserve food. So kind of going off of cooking in bulk, learning to preserve food appropriately is a huge skill that was very important during the Great Depression era. And it is definitely kind of a lost art these days. So it can be in the form of canning or jarring. It can be in the form of just knowing what kind of environment certain ingredients need, like dried beans or flour or rice, knowing how to cure vegetables like onions and garlic and squash and potatoes. If you know how to preserve food, it could be in like a homesteading type scenario where you're preserving food very traditionally, but even if you're not into homesteading and you're just looking for ways to save money on your grocery bill, if you know the kind of environment that your food is supposed to be kept in, it's a lot less likely to go bad, and that is going to save a lot of money. I can't remember the exact statistic, but I know Americans waste a ton of food every year. So if you can reduce that waste just by knowing how to store food appropriately or knowing how to preserve food, if you are into that like I am, it's definitely a big learning curve, but it's a very lost art. And just think, people during the Great Depression were that much closer to generations that did this normally for their everyday life. So it wasn't as lost as it is now. So you can imagine if something crazy were to happen now, there's reason to believe that it would go a lot worse. Clearly, I think these are skills well worth reviving and learning ourselves. Number 9 is a little obscure, but I thought it was worth saying. It's just to be content. So I love watching these interviews of people telling their stories during the Great Depression, and they say, so often, they say, things were hard, but we were happy, or things were hard, but we had it good. I do believe that the more we have, we get into this mindset that we need more, right? It's just kind of the world we live in now. And I love hearing from these people that had so little and things were so hard, especially during the Dust Bowl. Things were just dirty and nasty, but they still took care of what they had. They would get up and clean the house every day of inches of dust because they wanted to take care of what they had, and they really just had a mindset of contentment. So I do believe there's something to be said for mental fortitude and just looking at what you have and being grateful. I do know that gratitude is one of the biggest indicators of happiness, always something I can get better about myself. So I just didn't feel like this video would be complete if I didn't mention that this mindset in Great Depression era survivors is so prevalent, that there was just a sense of gratitude and a sense of contentment. And I know that I, and probably a lot of other people, could use a big dose of that today. I have 2 more for you. Number 10 is going to be use homemade cleaning products. Cleaning products can be really expensive and they can also be really harsh. So a lot of times we end up buying very specific cleaning products when really we could be using much more natural and homemade ingredients. Things like baking soda and vinegar can go a long way in cleaning a lot of the things that people think they need very specialized products for. So not only can you save a lot of money by knowing how to utilize household cleaning products, but also it's just another skill that we seem to have lost these days, knowing how to clean things with baking soda, vinegar, lemon juice. Now I will say, be careful what you use some of these things on. I know that I had kind of a bad experience with vinegar on some tile. It was black tile and didn't do great things for the finish. So maybe do a little research before you do it. Test things in a small inconspicuous area type thing. But one thing I'm trying to get better about myself is learning how to utilize these products instead of always going to the shelf and buying another bottle that who knows what's in it, and later finding out that I didn't even need to buy it in the first place because I could have cleaned it with much simpler ingredients. Things like laundry detergent, I'm still pretty skeptical of because I know that they can be pretty hard on your machines if, you know, people try homemade stuff. So if you've tried homemade laundry detergent, I'd love to hear how it worked out for you. That's something I'm interested in, but definitely don't want to ruin my washing machine with. Finally, the last thing I'll mention is limiting energy use. This was so big during the Great Depression. I remember many of these people talking about how they would have to take turns getting dressed in the morning so that someone could stand in front of the one register that they would use. I remember people talking about it being so hot and they wouldn't even turn on a fan because energy was so expensive. I do know that energy is a lot cheaper now than it was then, but I still think a lot can be said for learning to conserve energy use. We've kind of gotten out of the habit of just opening up the windows because the thermostats are all automatic now. You can kind of set it and forget it. But lately I've been remembering more to just turn off the thermostat, open up the windows. Not only does it save money on energy now, but the more you can acclimate yourself to being outside to, you know, temperatures a few degrees warmer or a few degrees cooler than you would normally be comfortable with, it actually will help you over time. And eventually, as long as nothing's too extreme, you won't even notice a little difference like that anyway. I know for myself, I am a very temperature sensitive person. So I've been seeing it kind of as knowing that it's good for me to be a few degrees warmer, be a few degrees cooler, and it is definitely good for me to get more fresh air inside the house. I was never against it, but I just realized I'd kind of gotten in the habit of forgetting to do it. So considering energy use can definitely go a long way, however that may look for you. So those are the things that I noticed in these interviews. If you have Great Depression era tips or stories from people that you know, I would love to hear them below. I do think it might just be the most amazing generation, and it saddens me that we are becoming more and more disconnected from them and their amazing knowledge. So please leave a comment below if you have anything to share, and if you haven't already, definitely check out some of those Great Depression era interviews on YouTube. It just goes to show that you don't need fancy production value to get some of the greatest stories out there. Thanks for watching today, and we will see you next time.